Go figure, right? So we'll go over one day from Korean, even though she went like 4 days. I watched all of it. It was garbage. We're not going to do garbage today. Department of State will do um, 2 days. Looks like I didn't want anything from the ninth. I don't know. I didn't have anything highlighted. When they go 4 or 5 days, guys, that's it's not that entertaining after a while. let's just admit, like, let's just admit the press briefings are sometimes kind of useless, and I waste 45 minutes of my life by watching them. But I do this out of passion, out of love, out of concern, whatever. So we will keep striving forward, and we will stay vigilant. And part of staying vigilant is watching it every day. But we're not going to watch that. We're going to go ahead. And YouTube should be with us now. YouTube is live. Perfect, perfect. All right, YouTube is live. We're all good. Ned Price is leaving us. Week 1. The sad days are starting. Jen Psaki left. It was heartbreaking. Kareen has not been as fun. Ned Price leaving is just as heartbreaking. He is just, his face, his freeze face, his anger and upset face it's so fantastic. What day are we on here? The 6th? All right, we're going to jump to 10:40 to get our day started. Ned Price leaving, take 1. Take 1.
Educated people in India, not.
Hey. I mean, yeah, we're going to do garbage, but I'm trying to cut this shit down. I watched 10 hours of these guys this week, and I'm trying to cut it down to you guys for, 40 minutes. But we're going to do a lot of the FBI, the PBS Federal Reserve. I think that was the chairman of the Federal Reserve was important to watch. And maybe we'll do a mini documentary of the Federal Reserve again to refresh after that. And we're going to do about 50 seconds of the Biden budget video. 10 seconds here, 10 seconds there, 10 seconds there, 20 seconds there, and that's it. We're not going to do Biden much. Because, go figure, he didn't say shit. I can't believe I watched that whole one. That was a waste of my time. These I don't mind watching. I like watching Ned. Biden's a garbage speaker. He really is.
Aligned country with which you are working to increase opposition to the Russian action, or the Russian war in Ukraine, and yet they seemed sympathetic not to the idea that Russia was attacked, but that somehow Russia was provoked or is threatened.
Matt, I think I told you at the outset that we have our work cut out for us. It is a task that we have, that NATO has, and that our allies and partners more broadly have to combat misinformation, to combat disinformation. We know that Russia is sowing disinformation, is sowing lies about the strategic intent of NATO. We believe the best antidote to disinformation and misinformation is information. It's why we get up here and brief every day. It's why the Secretary brings reporters with him everywhere he travels. It's why we do press avails when he's traveling, especially within our emerging partners. All of that is part and parcel of it.
Would you say the same about China?
When I say what about China?
About promoting disinformation, Trump.
I would.
And just you would. That's it.
And I wish I could get this louder for you guys. These are always so quiet. I got to turn up for what?
Of course, we have seen Russia and the PRC peddle misinformation and disinformation. Yes, Said.
Thank you. I think diplomacy.
Of course, we've seen Russia peddle misinformation. Russia's always peddling misinformation, coming from the U.S., who's denying any claims to with Nordstrom. They're having all sorts of claims right now. We're pro Georgia becoming part of the UN. Like, our propaganda is on point, yo, and he's talking about Russian propaganda.
I know that the new American ambassador, Lynn Tracy, only submitted her credentials a couple of months ago, and so on. Are there any? So she met with Russian officials and so on, but has Ambassador Antonov been meeting with anyone in the State Department? Has he met with the Secretary of State or the Undersecretary of State?
Well, it wouldn't be within protocol for the Russian ambassador to meet with the Secretary of State. That's not his natural counterpart. But yes, without going into details of these engagements, Ambassador Antonov has had contacts, including recent contacts, including in-person contact with appropriate State Department officials.
I asked this because I think last month he said he has not met with any American officials in a very, very long time.
It may not be to the extent and the cadence of that engagement may not be to his liking, but lines of communication remain open. That is of critical importance to us, and Ambassador Antonov is one element when it comes to those lines of communication.
And one quick follow-up. Secretary Austin said from Jordan yesterday that the fall of Bakhmut is not going to change the course of the war. Can you comment on this? I mean, are you guys now prepared that Bakhmut, all of it has fallen?
I'm not prepared to offer that assessment. Of course, our Ukrainian partners in the first instance are going to have the best tactical battlefield update. Our colleagues at the Department of Defense may speak to that as well. But the sentiment that Secretary Austin was putting forward is exactly right, as you might expect.
Really?
This is a conflict a war, an invasion, I should say, whose contours were set in place on February 24th, February 25th, and the days that followed
Conflict, a war, an invasion, I should say.
Of last year. It was very clear from the earliest hours of Russia's invasion of Ukraine that whenever this ended, it would end in a strategic failure for Russia. That's because the Ukrainians made very clear in the earliest hours of this conflict that the goals that President Putin sought to pursue, the fall of Ukraine, the fall of its government, the subjugation of its people, the erasure of its identity, essentially the subjugation of the country itself, would not be in the cards. And so, yes, we have been very clear that there are going to be tough days ahead. Fighting, while it has lulled somewhat during the winter months, it has continued to rage, especially in the east, especially in the south. There have been incremental gains by both sides. We expect that.
Incremental gains on both sides. I think that's code for we're letting Ukrainians die. Russians are dying too, but we're okay with this. Because all we're doing is gouging money and making our weapons friends profits. Is that what that's code for? I think that's what that's code for. I think that's what he meant to say. He didn't get all the way out though. He didn't quite get that out.
Dynamic to continue. The only reason a town like Bakhmut, which I believe, as Secretary Austin said, holds very little strategic import, is in the news, is in the headlines, is because the Russians have nothing else to point to over the course of more than 12 months of a brutal invasion, of their own brutal aggression. Were the Russians had they had any sort of success in this effort, the fall or the fact that a place like Bakhmut is being contested wouldn't even register halfway around the world. The fact that it is, the fact that people are focused on it is because the Russians have nothing to point to during the...
Dude, you just said the Russians have nothing to point to for a minute. You just rambled on about how the Russians have nothing to point to for a minute. Okay.
Basis points. The FOMC cited Russia.
Oh, wait, what? Oh. The Fed Reserve was on... So I did these in chronological order. I forgot that this was what was chronologically next. Fantastic. We get to do the Fed Reserve. Oh, this is so much a fun video. Alright. We gotta start from the beginning though, right? Can't go from the end. So,
feels
like
it the most when the
even though I want to do like a whole day devoted to Ned at some point, at the moment we're just doing the DC kind of scramble here. Doing the whole DC hop or whatever. And so yeah, this is the Fed Reserve. A lot of people spoke. We're only going to do a lot of it. Not all of it, though, by any means. I was thinking about doing Senator Warren only because she actually had a good day, and we got to appreciate our allies when they have good days, and forget them when they don't. But yeah, let's go with that. Let's get this going. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell testifies on monetary policy. Now we've watched a couple Federal Reserve documentaries, and so those of you who watch this channel regularly know a little bit more about it. If we need to, we can. I have a couple on standby if we feel like we should watch one. But
Cost of rent and groceries go up. It's not the economic pundits and politicians
Check this out.
who lecture us about discipline and stability. It's not the corporate executives who pretend they're making tough choices about prices while reporting record profit increases quarter after quarter and doing more and more stock buybacks. It's the people working hourly jobs to make ends meet. It's seniors on fixed income and Social Security. It's everyone who gets their income from a paycheck each month, not an investment portfolio. It's those same Americans who stand to lose the most if the Fed's actions to curb inflation go too far. No matter what goes wrong in our economy, a global pandemic, a war in Eastern Europe, weather disasters, profits somehow always manage to go up. Workers are left paying the price. As you noted, Chair Powell, the Fed's tools are only one element in our fight against inflation.
he says a few good things, but definitely a tool bag. So please don't think I am appreciating this man for everything he says. I'm appreciating some of what he says here.
It's a complex problem. Interest rates are a single, we know, blunt tool. Raising interest rates can't rebuild our supply chains and fix demand imbalances from the pandemic. Raising interest rates won't end Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine. Raising interest rates won't prevent avian flu from devastating 1/3 of our egg supply or weather disasters from destroying key crops. And raising interest rates certainly won't stop big corporations from exploiting all of these crises to jack up prices far beyond the increase in their costs. Last year, corporate profits hit a record high. Corporate PR chiefs assure us that these companies just have to raise prices. Their costs are going up. The workers just want to be paid too much. They have no other choice, they tell us. Yet when you look at their profits and their executive salaries and their stock buyback plans, it sure doesn't look like corporations have exhausted every available alternative. It's so brazen. Even global bankers called on the Fed to identify this profiteering as one of the biggest drivers of inflation. Paul Donovan, chief economist of global wealth management at UBS, wrote, "The Fed should make clear that raising profit margins are spurring inflation. Companies have passed higher costs on to consumers, but they've also taken advantage of circumstances to expand profit margins. The broadening of inflation beyond commodity prices is more profit margin expansion than wage cost pressures." Think about that. From a chief economist at UBS, I'll say it again, they've taken advantage, these companies have taken advantage of circumstances to expand profit margins. The broadening of inflation beyond commodity prices is more profit margin expansion than wage cost pressures, unquote. The Fed, understandably, the Fed can't force corporations to change their ways or rewrite the Wall Street business model on its own, but the Fed can talk about it. High interest rates, falling wages, increasing unemployment are all hallmarks of failed policies that end up helping Wall Street, the largest corporations in the country, the wealthiest people in the country. Because let's be clear what we're talking about when people use the economic speak that can cloud this conversation. Cooling the economy means laying off workers. Lowering demand means workers get fewer raises. Of course, there are times when the Fed must act. We can't allow inflation to become entrenched. We've seen encouraging trends that isn't happening. And there are other ways we can bring prices down. Instead of lowering demand, again, making people poor, laying people off, denying worker raises, we can speed up and strengthen our supply chains. We can bring critical manufacturing back to the U.S. We can rebuild our infrastructure. It's what we're doing with the CHIPS Act, with the Inflation Reduction Act, with the bipartisan infrastructure bill. For the first time in decades, we're finally recognizing the damage that I and many of my colleagues warned the corporate offshoring would do to our economy. Look at East Palestine, Ohio, a community that Senator Vance and I have visited a number of times recently. America learned about this small town last month when a Norfolk Southern train derailed and spewed hazardous material into this community. East Palestine is more than just a disaster headline. Columbiana County was once the center of American ceramics manufacturing, at one time producing 80% of ceramics, of dishware in this country. One county produced 80% of it. When I was there last week, I was talking to the sheriff at the 1820 Candle Company. He was talking about how the last one closed just a few years back. Like so many industries, these jobs moved overseas, and we know why. The same reason Norfolk Southern cuts cost at the expense of safety, eliminating one third of its workforce in the last 10 years. Then you're surprised with these derailments? It's the same reason corporations now keep prices high, even as supply chains stabilize. It's the Wall Street business model. Chair Powell knows that. I know that. My Republican colleagues and Democratic colleagues know that. It's a Wall Street business model. Quarter after quarter, corporations are expected to cut costs at any cost. They skimp on safety. They move production overseas to countries where they can pay workers less because of trade deals that they lobbied for. And Wall Street demands they post profit increases, even in the middle of a global pandemic. That's the problem with our economy. And not only will higher interest rates not solve it, if they're overdone, they'll make it worse. We can't risk undermining one of the successes of our current economy. For the first time in decades, workers are finally starting to get a little power in this economy. Unemployment's at a historic low, 3.4%. That's not just a number. That means Americans have more opportunities, more options, even in places that haven't seen a lot in recent years. It means people have the power to demand raises and retirement security and paid sick days and some control over their schedules. It means more Americans have the dignity that comes with a good job that provides for your family. We must here ensure that all Americans have the opportunity for that dignity of work. It's a critical time. The consequences of missteps could be severe. Mr. Chairman, two more things that affect your job. It's not just monetary policy that threatens American pocketbooks. Some of my colleagues have threatened the nation's full faith and credit by holding the debt ceiling hostage for partisan politics. Instead of paying our bills on time, they're essentially threatening all Americans. The Fifth Circuit's Consumer Financial Protection Bureau ruling could also cause unimaginable instability and chaos for families, for consumers, but also, as the chair knows, for a financial system. The Fifth Circuit is Wall Street's, no doubt about it, the Fifth Circuit is Wall Street's favorite courthouse. It recently ruled.
Wall Street owns all the courthouses. So he starts kind of losing me at the end here. But oh boy, the next one is fucking rough. So let's just finish.
The CFPB's independent funding is unconstitutional. If the Supreme Court upholds the Fifth Circuit's ruling, it will not only devastate CFPB, it will threaten the independent funding of many other federal agencies, including the Federal Reserve. I look forward to today's hearing how the Fed will balance its dual mandate and continue to promote an economy where everyone who wants a good job can find one, an economy that works for everyone. Senator Scott. Sorry.
Okay. I did not look up who these people are. I know they are members of Senate. I'm about to lose my shit. This is really bad.
Good morning, Chairman Powell. Sitting here, looking at my prepared remarks, thinking about, there's an opening coming where Vice Chairman Brainer's moving on. I think it's really important for us to make sure that all the information that we need in order to make a good decision on the next nom that we have in a timely fashion. So I would really implore the chair to make sure that happens, that every questionnaire that is asked from the person, we get. Every member of this committee has their questions answered in a timely fashion, and that the staff has their answers in a timely fashion. Listening to Chairman Brown, I thought to myself, fascinating, truly fascinating. I concluded that, well, I know Chairman Brown pretty well. I am sure he is sincere in his rant. But let me just say this. Spending and printing trillions of dollars, caving to the radical left in this country, seeing policies positive.
Trillions of dollars caving to the radical left. What the are you talking about? I'm pretty sure the trillions of dollars went to the banks, went to the rich in tax cuts during Trump. Most of our inflation is from tax cuts, lack of income, not outcome. Like, monetary MMT, monetary money theory. You can spend money as long as you're bringing money in. So all that money that went out on the first COVID wave with no tax coming back in is part of our inflation, not radical left spending.
And then implemented that led to the worst inflation in 40 years. Seeing our inflation at 9.1%. Seeing American families struggle because of the weight of the government on their shoulders. Seeing the devastation from South Carolina.
Oh, it's the government's fault, not the corporations that change their prices out of nowhere. Not price gouging, not massive profits. It's the government that he's a part of.
To Ohio. It's unbelievable that the progressives in this country who caused a 9.1% inflation.
The progressive caused the inflation because of those radical left things that we all got, like Medicare for all and a $15 minimum wage, and name anything that we got. What did the far left, radical left get? What are these things that the radical left got? Please explain to me what the radical left got.
Within turn, somewhere besides in the mirror, to see the absolute devastation caused by their out-of-control spending is remarkable. Remarkable. To stop the out-of-control inflation caused by the out-of-control spending, the Fed steps in to cool the economy. Well, the definition of cooling the economy is necessary because we've seen the most radical approach to a problem that was in our rearview mirror being used as a Trojan horse to bring in a level of socialism and
hold on, what's your metaphors here? It's in the rearview mirror with a Trojan horse.
Spending that our nation has not seen in my lifetime. The facts are very simple.
You're getting all sorts of.
When you get to
views.
9.1% inflation in this nation, as a kid who grew up in a single parent household, mired in poverty, a 40% today, 100% just a year ago increase in the gas prices devastates single mothers around this country. For seniors on fixed income, whose savings are being depleted with an average cost just last month of a $433 increase because of inflation. For my friends on the other side of the aisle to look any place besides a mirror, I find stunning. The truth is that when your food prices go up over 20%, when your electricity is up over 20%, you have to ask yourself, where in the world are they? They cannot be in this universe. It must be an alternate universe where, in fact, it's okay for us to see prices go through the roof and our economy not stumble, but fall into a ditch. Why are we in the ditch? Because
Yes. Our government makes our food and electricity. That's why our prices are going up. Our government makes all of our food and electricity. I forgot. I was so confused.
progressives used the pandemic as a way to usher in a form of spending that takes the money out of the pockets of everyday Americans and puts it in the coffers of the government. There is a better way. The better way is to trust the American people. And when you do so, we don't have to have the Fed come in and raise interest rates so high to quell the challenges in our economy so that today versus 18 months ago, the price of the same house for your mortgage payment is twice as high. Why? Because of the runaway spending of our friends on the other side of the aisle.
Yes, all that money we're collecting. Yes, all the money. Give it, give it, give it. Money, please. Money, please. I'm not getting anything for this. What are you talking about? These people are crazy. They actually talk like we've gotten something.
I'm sure I do not have time for my opening comments, but I will say without any question.
You don't have time for your opening comments. You have been talking for 5 minutes. You don't have time for your opening comments when you've been talking for 5 minutes. And all you've done is regurgitated right-wing talking points. And now you're saying, I don't have time to talk all my things I want to say. I don't have time to say anything because I've regurgitated right-wing talking points and now I got to pretend like I don't have anything, I don't have time to say the intellectual things I wanted to say. No, you're just a robot clown bullshitter. And we don't like robot clown bullshitters. And if we pulled back, you probably have like some sort of mask or something. Actually, that's kind of cool. I didn't even think about this stuff before. Like, straight up. I'll find it. Never mind. We'll do this in a minute. This guy is creepy to me.
As I look around the country and I ask myself, how devastating is it that today it costs $433 more than it did a year ago? The answer is it is a crisis. When the average family in our country just a couple of years ago didn't have $400 in their savings for an emergency, to have prices go up by this amount.
Wait, so you can admit that an average American didn't have $400 in their emergency fund after the right wings had control of the White House. After 4 years of Republicans, people were broke and had not even $400 in their bank accounts, and now you're mad because inflation? Why aren't you mad because most Americans are broke? And you guys had a chance to fix that and you didn't. Why aren't you mad about that? Man, I'm going to take forever just talking about this guy. We're not going to get to all the people I want to watch.
It's devastating to have a conversation about rents around the country, looking at the inflationary effect and the absolute devastation of a snarling supply chain.
Wait. So you're going to blame rents going up on inflation, not Blackwater, like buying BlackRock? Blackwater. Same thing. Buying all the freaking houses in the country on all the apartment complexes and raising prices arbitrarily to privately fund hedge funds and to privately boost their investment portfolios. But you're going to blame it on inflation of progressive ideologies. You're fucking ridiculous.
We haven't seen in my lifetime, run by my friends in the progressives. Unbelievable. But to get to you, Chairman Powell, one of the comments that you've made that I think is really important in one of the speeches you gave in January, and I apologize for my rant, I just wanted to make sure my rant was consistent with my friend here.
Oh yeah, your rant was consistent, buddy. I'm not your buddy, guy.
It is essential, you said, that we stick to our statutory goals and authorities, and that we resist the temptation to broaden our scope to address other important social issues of the day. Taking on new goals, however worthy, without a clear statutory mandate would undermine the case of our independence. You further noted that, and I quote, without explicit congressional legislation, it would be inappropriate for us to use our monetary policy or supervisory tools to promote a greener economy or to achieve other climate-based goals. We are not and will not be a climate policymaker. Do you still stand by those comments?
I do.
Thank you. Finally, I know we're not in the question. I know. I get it. Finally,
You now have 4 minutes and 12 seconds.
yes, I knew the chairman would dock that for my time, and I appreciate you doing so with a great humor. Great humor. Finally, several of my Republican colleagues and I sent a letter to you discussing Vice Chair of Supervision Michael Barr's plan to conduct a holistic review of capital standards. I look forward to discussing those capital standards during my Q&A, and I will thank you for our recent conversation that we had that helped illuminate some of the necessary challenges that we face as a nation and your answers to it. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Speaking of illuminating, thank you, Senator Scott.
Yes, sir.
I-
Thank you for allowing me to use this.
Today we'll hear from Chair of the Federal Reserve Jerome Powell on monetary policy in the state of our economy. And I don't expect Chair Powell to weigh in on the mini debate we just had, but I think we all know that the debt increase was much larger under President Trump and a Republican Senate than it has been since. Chair.
Yeah, let's get. I win the debate. I win the debate. It's not your opening statements of a Federal Reserve chair testifying shouldn't be a debate between the two chair heads. That's not what's supposed to happen. Politics is such a joke, guys. His opening statements were mediocre. He had a few good zingers. The other guy was just a clown, and that was so like. This is supposed to be important. Now, I mean, we're talking to the Federal Chair Reserve. Like, this guy is an absolute tool of the banks. He's an absolute tool of money and corporate power. So let's all remember who we're listening to here.
Powell, thank you for your service and your testimony today.
Chairman Brown, Ranking Member Scott, and other members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to present the Federal Reserve's semi-annual monetary policy report. My colleagues and I are acutely aware that high inflation is causing significant hardship, and we're strongly committed to returning inflation to our 2% goal. Over the past year, we've taken forceful actions to tighten the stance of monetary policy. We have covered a lot of ground, and the full effects of our tightening so far are yet to be felt. Even so, we have more work to do. Our policy actions are guided by our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices. Without price stability, the economy does not work for anyone. In particular, without price stability, we will not achieve a sustained period of labor market conditions that benefit all. I'll review the current economic situation before turning to monetary policy. The data from January on employment, consumer spending, manufacturing production, and inflation have partly reversed the softening trends that we'd seen in the data just a month ago. Some of this reversal likely reflects the unseasonably warm weather in January in much of the country. Still, the breadth of the reversal, along with revisions to the previous quarter, suggests that inflationary pressures are running higher than expected at the time of our previous FOMC meeting. From a broader perspective, inflation has moderated somewhat since the middle of last year, but remains well above the FOMC's longer-run objective of 2%. The 12-month change in total PCE inflation has slowed from its peak of 7% in June to 5.4% in January, as energy prices have declined and supply chain bottlenecks have eased. Over the past 12 months, core PCE inflation, which excludes the volatile food and energy prices, was 4.7%. As supply chain bottlenecks have eased and tighter policy has restrained demand, inflation in the core goods sector has fallen. And while housing services inflation remains too high, the flattening out in rents evident in recently signed leases points to a deceleration in this component of inflation over the year ahead.
Again, stop calling it inflation in housing. It's a controlled increase to jack up and inflate hedge funds and payouts for like retirement funds and shit, because they know that they don't actually get dividends from, they don't get dividends from stocks anymore. Like, dividends aren't really a thing. They just pay out everything to their, chairman and stuff. So, yeah, they have to buy housing to give out money for their hedge funds and for their retirement funds and such. Yeah, it's all a Ponzi scheme, guys.
That said, there's little sign of disinflation thus far in the category of core services excluding housing, a category that accounts for more than half of core consumer expenditures. To restore price stability, we'll need to see lower inflation in this sector, and there will very likely be some softening in the labor market conditions. Although nominal wage gains have slowed somewhat in recent months, they remain above what is consistent with 2% inflation and current trends in productivity. Strong wage growth is good for workers, but only if it's not eroded by inflation. Turning to growth, the U.S. economy has slowed significantly last year, with real GDP rising at a below-trend pace of 0.9%. Although consumer spending appears to be expanding at a solid pace this quarter, other recent indicators point to subdued growth of spending and production. Activity in the housing sector continues to weaken, largely reflecting higher mortgage rates. Higher interest rates and slower output growth also appear to be weighing on business fixed investment. Despite the slowdown in growth, the labor market remains extremely tight. The unemployment rate was 3.4% in January, its lowest level since 1969. Job gains remained very strong in January, while the supply of labor has continued to lag. As of the end of December, there were 1.9 job openings for each unemployed individual. Close.
So this lack of unemployment is going to be a reason for all this inflation coming up.
To the all-time peak recorded last March, while unemployment insurance claims have remained near historical lows. Turning to monetary policy. With inflation well above our longer-run goal of 2%, and with the labor market remaining extremely tight, the FOMC has continued to tighten the stance of monetary policy.
These guys in the back are like laughing at like memes or some shit. This is how important it is, right, guys? This is how important this is. There's people in the back here that are literally laughing at like memes or some shit.
Raising interest rates by 4.5 percentage points over the past year. We continue to anticipate that ongoing increases in the target range for the federal funds rate will be appropriate in order to attain a stance of monetary policy that is sufficiently restrictive to return inflation to 2% over time. In addition, we are continuing the process of significantly reducing the size of our balance sheet. We are seeing the effects of our policy actions on demand in the most interest-sensitive sectors of the economy. It will take time, however. At the Federal Reserve, we will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are 23 of us on this committee. Almost everyone will be here today. I ask each of us to stay as close to the 5-minute mark as we can because we have votes at 11:30. So thank you all for your cooperation. Chair Powell, thank you. Job growth is strong as unemployment remains historically low. You might not know that from the opening statements. Many drivers of inflation, corporate greed, rising inequality, supply chain disruptions, Russia's bestiality, if you will, in Ukraine won't get better because of interest rate increases. Every indication is that this post-pandemic economy is different. Should we be worried, Mr. Chair, that the Fed is treating this economic period as it has in the past instead of reacting differently?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we've been aware since the very beginning and have discussed this publicly on many occasions that there are some differences this time. We, in particular, have not seen the kind of supply side collapse that we saw at the very beginning of the inflation outbreak. Also, the outbreak of a war which had significant effects on commodity prices a year ago. So all that is different. There are also, though, some similarities. there is a mismatch between supply and demand. You can see that in the goods sector still. You saw it in housing prices going up over 40% since before the pandemic, and you see it in the labor market where we have 1.9 job openings for every opening, for every unemployed person. So we're well aware that this particular situation involves a mix of of forces, not all of which our tools can affect. But there is a job here for us to do in better aligning demand with supply.
Okay, understanding you have limited tools to address inflation in our conversations in the past show my concern about continued rate increases that may not actually address the root cause of inflation. They hurt workers, and many of us contend we can't follow the same old playbook. Next question. Last year, 3 banking regulators issued proposed updates on the Community Reinvestment Act to account for changes in our banking system. My question is, does the Fed remain committed to work with FDIC and OCC to finalize a CRA rule, and when will that rule likely be finalized?
Yes, we do remain committed, and I believe we are in broad agreement with the other 2 agencies on the revisions to the rule. So now we're in the process of writing all that down, and that'll take some time. And then after that, of course, it will come to the Board of Governors for a vote, and that'll involve briefings and discussions. And I can't give you an exact date, but
as quickly as possible.
Yes, but it will be some months.
Thank you. Banks weathered the shock of the COVID-19 shutdowns mostly because of the fiscal response provided by Congress. We now see a spike in loan delinquencies and increase in overall risk. Banks are again plowing billions, as many other corporate leaders, always defended by people on that side of the aisle, into stock buybacks, which makes me concerned that there's a doubt.
Oh, man. And Biden has the nerve to say that we're not as divided anymore. And these guys, like, every time they discuss, like, they just call out the other side of the aisle, the other side of the aisle.
Downturn in the economy, banks could end up with too little capital. That's why I'm worried about any potential rollbacks of safeguards or regulations. Can you assure me that the Fed will keep capital requirements strong and exercise more long-term forward thinking than corporate CEOs that seem to be focused on the short term?
I can assure you as to the first part that we'll keep capital requirements strong.
I didn't expect you to comment on give me an opinion about your looking more forward than companies that look at the short-term benefits of stock buybacks. Mr. Chair, when you last testified, ask.
That was very direct, huh? He was just like, I will not even acknowledge the first part of that. Not even gonna acknowledge it. Not even gonna reply to the reply.
About the risk posed by crypto assets, stablecoin, the Fed, and other regulated possibilities. How's the Fed evaluating the risks of crypto-related activities by your supervised institutions?
So this is something we've been quite active in this area, and I'll say that we believe that innovation is very important over time to the economy. We don't want to stifle innovation. We don't want regulation to stifle innovation in a way that just favors incumbents and that kind of thing. But like everyone else, we're watching what's been happening in the crypto space. And, what we see is, quite a lot of turmoil. We see fraud. We see a lack of transparency. We see run risk, lots and lots of things like that. And so what we've been doing is making sure that the
Sure glad there's no fraud in the Wall Street sector, Enron. I'm sure glad there's no deception in the private sector, AIG. I'm sure glad there's no corruption or that's not right.
that the regulated financial institutions that we supervise and regulate are careful, are taking great care in the ways that they engage with the with the whole crypto space, and that they give us prior notice. And we've issued, along with the FDIC and the OCC, a number of issuances of notices to that effect.
Thank you, and I will close with this. I've long pushed for the Fed to prioritize workers and for the leaders of the Fed to reflect the diversity of our country. We've made progress, but our work is not done. We have a new opening. Understand, it's not your job to appoint the new Fed member. We have a number of upcoming vacancies at the Reserve Banks. I support Senator Reid from Rhode Island, Senator Menendez from New Jersey, and other colleagues who are pushing for more diverse voices at the Fed. Senator Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, the Chairman and I both have strong passions about challenges that we face as a country. The one thing that I do believe that we agree on is the importance of having a strong capital markets as relates to making sure that Americans have the ability to continue to grow their businesses and to solve their challenges. And frankly, I hope that we get there. Building on the same comment that Chairman had around capital standards is where I'm going to go with my thoughts today. When I think back on these last few years, it's hard not to recognize the extraordinary efforts our financial institutions of all sizes, frankly, undertook to administer a program like the PPP, all while weathering a shutdown of our global economy. I welcome your...
Did he just say PPP was a good thing? PPP was so corrupt, horrible, misgiven out, like only favored the rich, only favored the big companies that had big bank ties. Like, are you serious? Did you just say that as a good thing?
Your thoughts, but from my viewpoint, our banking system was resilient. Our financial institutions stepped up and
Resilient? We bailed them out.
delivered aid to support families and businesses every single day. That's why
Seriously, this person's from South Carolina? Because I do not.
Vice Chair Barr's broad comments around holistic review of our capital trouble me so much. We should be laser focused on our economy and addressing the needs of everyday Americans trying to forge a new future and helping them open the door to opportunity. As you and I both know, capital and its quality must be continually scrutinized, but increased capital does not necessarily provide an increased benefit. And requiring banks to hold capital that is not risk-based and appropriately tailored to a bank's size, scope, and activities can cause more harm than good. At a time of record inflation, where everyday needs are more expensive, we should not be pursuing actions that are harmful. Rather, we should be supporting the engine of our economy, small businesses. While I remain greatly concerned by the vice...
And how come Republicans giving tax breaks to big corporations? If you want to support small businesses, tax the hell out of corporations so small businesses can compete.
Chair's comments, I am hopeful that you will ensure this review is appropriate, keeping the impacts on our banking system front and center. We must...
I'm going to say this, I'm going to start saying this on a regular basis. We could get rid of income tax if we went back to a 40% tax rate on corporations. We could get rid of all income tax. If we tax corporations at a 40%, no loopholes, just tax the crap out of them, we could get rid of all income tax. Just saying.
promote and further the growth of our economy and thereby our people. Anything less should be unacceptable. To that end, will you commit that any ongoing capital review by the Federal Reserve will follow the law and that any follow-on regulatory proposals will be risk-based and tailored to an institution's activity, size, and complexity, and not a one-size-fits-all?
Yes, I can easily commit to that. We're very strongly committed to tailoring, and that'll be, I can say that anything we do will reflect tailoring, which is a long-held principle for us and also now a requirement in the law.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. 2 weeks ago, I sent a letter with Chairman McHenry to Chair Gensler regarding the SEC's climate disclosure rule, urging him to rescind his proposal and reminding him that the SEC is a market regulator, not a climate forecaster. Much like Congress designed the SEC to protect investors, to maintain fair, orderly, and efficient markets, and to facilitate capital formation, and not to advance progressive climate change policies, Congress designed the Federal Reserve to promote price stability and maximum employment, not to play politics. To that end, I find worrying the Fed's announcement of
not to play politics. The whole game's politics, bruh. The whole thing is politics.
recent actions
It's
to consider
all-
climate-related scenarios, coupled with remarks by the Vice Chair of Supervision, as attempts to incorporate broader ESG policies into the financial services system. Banks have and continue to account for weather-related risks in their risk management, but efforts that attempt to predict climate change far into the future fall outside the scope of their authority. Importantly, The level of speculation required in these models should highlight their arbitrary and capricious nature. At a time when our economy is suffering from historically high inflation, I expect our central bank to focus its time and resources on bringing inflation down, not on policy outside of its mandate. I noted in my opening statement a recent speech that you've given about the state of the Fed and how you should resist the temptation to broaden its scope and to address social issues. Do you agree that the Federal Reserve does not have the authority or statutory direction to use its monetary policy or supervisory tools to wade into the ESG or other climate policies?
I do. As you know, there's a
Are you saying that you don't think banks have the rights to do economic policy? That's crazy. You're a right winger. You're supposed to be all for it. I thought that was a stupid question and a stupid line of questioning, so let's move on to, I guess, I said 38, so, oh, poor buddies, itchy. All right, so we're skipping ahead a few minutes, but this is about 13 and a half minutes I wanted to watch here, so not skipping that far ahead, but just going to skip, I think, one person, maybe two, and, I guess just one.
Can you
person.
confirm that you share Vice
This guy.
Chair Barr's views on this AM?
We're skipping this guy.
I will confirm that, but I'll have to get back to you on the status of that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Menendez of New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to take this moment to remind my colleagues that there are more than 62 million Latinos that call the United States home. We are the largest minority group in the country. We account for nearly 20% of the United States population.
Yeah, this is a good little rant. I gotta give my dog a allergy pill. He is not comfortable right now. I'll be right back. This is a good little rant. It's relevant-ish. I think it's important, but it's one like so the Federal Reserve is like 13 regional chairs, and they get to vote on one chair. All the rest of the chairs are ran by the banks. So what we actually vote in isn't as important as what the banks say. So the banks need to step up on this issue, not so much the Fed.
We contribute almost $3 trillion in GDP. Yet Latinos have no representation in the Federal Reserve's leadership. In the 109-year history of the Federal Reserve, there has never been a single member of the Board of Governors or regional bank president who has the lived experience of being Latino in the United States. And in practice, that means that the voices of nearly 1/5 of our country's people are repeatedly drowned out when the Fed is making critical decisions on economic policy. Decisions that affect whether a Latino family can afford their first home, find a job that pays a living wage, send their children to college, save for a comfortable retirement, or get a loan to expand their business. Right now, the Biden administration has a clear opportunity to make history with its next nomination to the Board of Governors. It has identified a number of highly qualified Latino candidates who have dedicated their careers to the fields of economics, who are committed to the Fed's dual mandate, who will preserve the independence of the central bank. The administration has rightly nominated and advocated for a number of diverse candidates with similar qualifications, both at the Fed and elsewhere. But despite having 5 opportunities over the past 2 years to nominate a qualified Latino economist to serve at the Federal Reserve, this administration has repeatedly chosen not to. Representation, or lack thereof, does not happen by accident. It is a choice, and I hope the administration makes the right choice with this nomination. Mr. Chairman, would you say that it is a truism that the United States dollar is the reserve of choice in the world?
Yes, I would.
And that brings us enormous benefits, does it not?
Yes, it does.
Now, 12 years ago, a Republican House brought us to the brink of defaulting on the debt for the first time in history of this country, jeopardizing our credit and the world economy. I'm getting a sense of deja vu because, once again, Republicans are recklessly demanding draconian spending cuts to programs that hardworking U.S. families rely on in exchange for allowing the Treasury Department to pay for spending that Congress, including most of them, have already voted to authorize. You want to talk about spending cuts, it seems to me that the budget is the time to do that, but not to put the full faith and credit of the United States at risk. Chairman Powell, can you talk about the catastrophic damage a debt default would inflict on the economy?
So I guess I will start, if I can, by saying that these are really matters between the executive branch and Congress. We do not seek to play a role in these policy issues. But at the end of the day, there's only one solution to this problem, and that is Congress. Whatever else may happen will happen, but Congress really needs to raise the debt ceiling. That's the only way out in a timely way that allows us to pay all of our bills when and as due. And if we fail to do so, I think that the consequences are hard to estimate, but they could be extraordinarily adverse, and could do longstanding harm.
Well, I think that's a mild statement of what would happen. I understand. I didn't ask you to engage in the congressional executive branch roles. I asked you about the abstract question of what happens if you have a debt default. Isn't even this constant fight putting into question the possibility that the United States will not honor its full faith and credit have consequences within the economy?
In principle, it could. I think markets tend and
In
observers tend to
principle.
watch this and tend to think that it will work out, and it has in the past worked out. So it needs to work out this time too.
Now, seeing your testimony before the committee, is it fair to say that you'll do whatever is necessary to tame inflation?
We serve a dual mandate, and we will do what we can, everything we can to restore price stability while also serving maximum employment.
And primarily that means additional rate increases, would it not? What other tool do you have?
That's what we have. The balance sheet, the shrinkage of the balance sheet will continue too, but it's principally rate hikes.
So the question is, when
We will use our tools, which is principally rate hikes. Like it's such a bait. Like this is what they do, guys.
does that part of doing anything necessary to tame to tame inflation, come into conflict with your other mandate of maximum employment?
Not now, when we have the lowest unemployment in 54 years, and where we have a labor market that is extremely tight, extremely. So, but that time could come, but it really isn't now, where we're very far from our price stability mandate, and in effect, the economy is past most estimates of maximum employment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Menendez. Senator Kennedy of Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Powell, thank you for being here. Thank you to you and your team for helping to save the economy during the pandemic meltdown.
What a joke. The Fed saved the economy during the pandemic meltdown. What a joke. That's ridiculous. Ridiculous.
For what it's worth, I'm generally supportive of the actions of the Fed right now, and I'm not going to ask you today to blame anybody.
I will.
When Congress spends money, it stimulates the economy, does it not?
Well, it would
Oh, that's why. He is the closest to MMT that we're going to get. This is good.
depend on whether that's funded by tax increases or not. But so, if there's a spending that's not accompanied by taxes, would have a net at the margin stimulative effect.
Well, and when Congress borrows money to spend even more, that stimulates the economy even more, does it not?
At the margin, yeah.
Okay. If Congress reduced the rate of growth in its spending and reduced the rate of growth in its debt accumulation, it would make your job easier in reducing inflation, would it not?
I don't think fiscal policy right now is a big factor driving inflation at this moment, but it's absolutely essential that we.
Okay, hold on. Here's the Fed Reserve guy saying fiscal policy at the moment isn't driving inflation. That is the head of the Fed Reserve in front of Congress or Senate, the Senate House hearing, saying that fiduciary responsibility of this inflation is not with our Washington members of D.C.
do slow the pace of growth, particularly for the areas of the budget.
All right, let's try to unpack this then. I'm not trying to trick you. You're raising interest rates. You're raising interest rates to slow the economy, are you not?
Yes, to cool the economy off.
And one of the ways you measure your success, other than fluctuation in gross domestic product, is the unemployment rate. Is it not?
Yes, one of the measures.
Okay. So in effect, I'm not being critical. When you're slowing the economy, you're trying to put people out of work. That's your job, is it not?
Not really. We're trying to restore price stability.
No, you're trying to raise
not
the
wages,
you're trying to raise the unemployment rate.
There are
And
a lot of
that mean I know you don't like the phrase, so let me strike it. You're trying to raise the unemployment rate, are you not?
No, we're not trying to raise it. We're trying to realign supply and demand, which could happen through a bunch of channels, like, for example, just job openings.
All right,
Job
let
openings
me
could,
put it another way, okay? The Economist did a wonderful study. They looked at 10 disinflationary periods in America going all the way back to the 1950s. Disinflation is what you're trying to do. It's a slowing in the rate of inflation. Am I right?
Yes.
In other words, prices don't go down, they just don't go up as fast. Deflation is when prices actually go down. You're trying to achieve disinflation, are you not?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Based on history, in the 10 times that we got inflation down, disinflation since the 1950s, in order to reduce inflation by 2%,
Okay.
unemployment had to go up.
He started with MMT, and now he's talking about inflation and saying that the Fed's trying to cause unemployment, and that's the only way to get it to go down. But he started out with MMT, and then he went on to the Fed's trying to kill jobs. So we started out in a good spot, and then we headed in a different direction.
3.6%. Now, that's history, is it not?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, but yes, the standard has been that there have been recessions and downturns when the
Okay.
Fed has tried to reduce
Now,
inflation.
right now, the current inflation rate is 6.4%, and the current unemployment rate is 3.4%. Now, if history is right, I'm not asking you to again, blame anybody, but if history is right, unless you get some help, in order to get inflation down from 6.4% to, let's say, 4.4%, and the unemployment rate is going to have to rise to 7% based on history.
That's what the record would say.
Okay, and to get inflation down to 2.2%, based on history, an immutable fact, unemployment would have to go to 10.6%. Would it not?
No, I wouldn't.
That's what the record shows. That's what the history shows.
Yeah, I don't think that kind of a number is at all in
I
play
mean,
here.
I know you're reluctant to admit it, and you don't want to get in the middle of a policy dispute. But I think it's undeniable. It's undeniable that the
And he's a Kennedy, so it's like it's so hard to root for him, but he is putting him on the rope-a-dope, right? Like he's a Kennedy, he's a tool bag, but at the same time,
only way we're going to get this sticky inflation down is to attack it on the monetary side, which you're doing, and on the fiscal side, which means Congress has got to reduce the rate of growth of spending and reduce the rate of growth of debt accumulation. Now, I get that you don't want to get in the middle of that fight. But the more we help on the fiscal side, the fewer people you're going to have to put out of work. Isn't that a fact?
Please answer.
It could work out that way.
Sir?
It could work out that way.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. Senator Reed of Rhode Island is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Powell, for being here today. We saw in the wake of COVID the globalized supply chain disrupted significantly, and we're in the process, of, in some respects, of rebuilding a supply chain with emphasis on sourcing in the United States. To what extent did that disruptive supply chain contribute to inflation, and to what extent will the new, if you envision it, the new supply chain that is located in the United States and other friendly countries affect inflation?
So the initial outbreak of inflation was all about spending on goods where people couldn't spend on services. So goods spending went way up, and the global supply chain, many goods are imported. The global supply chain just collapsed, and that was the source of the original inflation. It has now spread over the last 2 years to housing and also to the rest of the service sector. So to your question, we are seeing goods inflation has been coming down for some time now. It's still too high, but it's coming down. Housing services there's in the pipeline. You see the new leases that are being signed, and what that tells you is that in the next 6 to 12 months, we will see that come down. But this big service sector, that's everything else, which is financial services, medical services, travel and leisure, all of those things, that's really where that's the source of the inflation we have now, which had nothing to do with the supply, or not much to do with the supply chains. That's where the challenge is now.
And is there anything that you can do that would target that service area without affecting the other areas?
There's not really. You know,
No.
our monetary policy
No.
tools are famously powerful but blunt.
A different topic, and that is, as you're probably aware, the Fifth Circuit delivered a ruling
That's
in
a
the
great
Community Financial
question.
Services Association versus CFPB that the CFPB's funding mechanism is unconstitutional. Just like the Board of Governors, the CFPB is a bureau of the Federal Reserve. Both the Board of Governors and CFPB rely on the same source of funds and draw on those funds in virtually identical ways. If the Board of Governors' funding structure would be found unconstitutional, what would the implications be for the country and monetary policy?
Well, it would be very significant, but I have to say, we have significant responsibilities, but I would be reluctant to comment on a case that's before the Supreme Court.
aw, reluctant to comment. Go figure. All right, let's jump ahead. Like I said, we can't do this whole thing, right? This is ridiculous. But we can be vigilant. We can be vigilant. Keep up on it at least.
Raising interest rates is designed to slow the economy and throw people out of work. So far, you haven't tipped the economy into recession, but you haven't brought inflation entirely under control
Oh, this crazy lady. Remember, she's a Native American. Ha 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 ha.
either. And maybe the reason for that is that other things are also keeping prices high, things you can't fix with high interest rates, things like price gouging and supply chain kinks and a war in Ukraine. But you are determined to continue to raise interest rates, so I want to take a look at where you're headed. In December, the Fed released its projections on the state of the economy under your monetary policy plan. According to the Fed's own report, if you continue raising interest rates as you plan, unemployment will be 4.6% by the end of the year, more than a full point higher than it is today. Chair Powell, if you hit your projections, do you know how many people who are currently working, going about their lives, will lose their jobs?
All right, again, I don't agree with Elizabeth on all things. I definitely know who she is. But when it comes to these things, she does give some good little speeches once in a while.
I don't have that number in front of me. I will say it's not
just
an
a math
intended
problem.
consequence. It's
Well,
not,
but it is, and it's in your report, and that would be about 2 million people who would lose their jobs, people who are working right now, making their mortgages. So, Chair Powell, if you could speak directly to the 2 million hardworking people who have decent jobs today, who you're planning to get fired over the next year, what would you say to them? How would you explain your view that they need to lose their jobs?
I would explain to people more broadly that inflation is extremely high and it's hurting the working people of this country badly. All of them, not just 2 million of them, but all of them are suffering under high inflation, and we are taking the only measures we have to bring inflation down.
And putting 2 million people out of work is just part of the cost, and they just have to bear it?
Will working people be better off if we just walk away from our jobs and inflation remains 5-6%?
Let me ask you about what happens if you do this.
That was such a knee-jerk, snappy reaction to that question. That was not good. That's a 14-year-old snappy little brat. That's not...
Since the end of World War II, there have been 12 times in which the unemployment rate has increased by 1 percentage point within 1 year, exactly what you're aiming to do right now. How many of those times did the U.S. economy avoid falling into a recession?
You know, it's not as black and white as very
Just
very
looking at the
infrequent.
numbers, it actually is pretty black
Alan
and
Blinder's
white.
written a book on this, and
There have been 12 times that we've seen a 1 point increase in the unemployment rate in a year. That's exactly what your Fed report has put out as the projection and the plan based on how you're going to keep raising these interest rates. How many times did the economy fail to fall into a recession after doing that? Out of 12 times.
I think the number is 0.
I think the number is 0. That's exactly right. So then the question becomes, we've got 2 million people out of work. Can you stop it at 2 million people? History suggests that the Fed has a terrible track record of containing modest increases in the unemployment rate. Once the economy starts shedding jobs, it's kind of like a runaway train. It is really hard to stop. In fact, in 11 out of the 12 times that the unemployment rate increased by a full percentage point within 1 year, unemployment went on to rise another full percentage point on top of that. If that's what happens this time, we'd be looking at least 3.5 million people who would lose their jobs. So, Chair Powell, if you reach your goal and 2 million people get laid off by the end of this year, and then, just like in 11 out of 12 times that unemployment has risen by a point in a single year, it keeps on rising, and then we've got 2.5 million people out of work, we've got 3 million people who get laid off, we've got 3.5 million people who get laid off. What's your plan?
What's your plan?
Right now, the unemployment rate is 3.4%, which is the lowest in 54 years. And we actually don't think that we need to see a sharp or enormous increase in unemployment to get inflation under control.
I'm looking at your projections. Do you call laying off 2 million people this year not a sharp increase in unemployment?
I would say 4.5%.
Explain that to the 2 million families who are going to be out of work.
We're not targeting any of that. But I would say even 4.5% unemployment is well better than most of the time for the last 75 years.
In other words, you don't have a plan to stop a runaway train if it occurs. Chair Powell, you are gambling with people's lives, and there's a pile of data showing that price gouging and supply chain kinks and the war in Ukraine are driving up prices. You cling to the idea that there's only one solution: lay off millions of workers. We need a Fed that will fight for families, and if you're not going to lead that charge, we need someone at the Fed who will.
Senator Vance of Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Powell, thanks so much for being here. I have a question that's slightly far afield, but how often do you get to talk to the Federal Reserve Chairman, so I might as well ask it. So to give some context.
You get to talk to him once a year because you're on this freaking committee. Genius. I mean, I get the, a lot of them go for sound bites, right? Like, they're all going for, their 5-minute sound bites. They want things that are nice and clickable, things that they can put on their websites or whatever. But you get to speak to them once a year, so that sound bite doesn't really work for people in the know. People that understand.
Context here. My family comes from Appalachia. Particularly, my grandparents grew up in southeastern Kentucky, coal country, and then moved to southern Ohio, where I now have the honor of representing all of Ohio. And one of the things that you hear a lot when you study the regional history of Appalachia is it's often described as possessing a resource curse, right? So there's a lot of coal in central Appalachia that enables a certain amount of consumption. Obviously, consumption is good. People need food and medicine and other things. But there's also a pretty good argument that for a host of reasons, it causes malinvestment in the region. And consequently, you have lower productivity growth, lower innovation, and an economy that's much less diversified and much less dynamic. I'm wondering when I hear about the history, when I think about and read about the history of Appalachia and the resource curse, I'm struck by by the idea that you could make a similar argument about the reserve currency status of the United States.
Look at this person next to him. Look at her. She looks like she's trying to be the Joker. Uncomfortable, awkward. I don't know what is happening with her.
Dollar. Americans have enjoyed one of the greatest privileges of the international economy for the last nearly 8 decades, a strong dollar that acts, of course, as the world's reserve currency. You know that better than I do. Now, this has obviously been great for American purchasing power. We enjoy cheaper imports. Americans, when they travel abroad, benefit from lower costs. But it does come at a cost to American producers. I think in some ways you can argue that the reserve currency status is a massive subsidy to American consumers, but a massive tax on American producers. Now, I know the strong dollar is sort of a sacred cow of the Washington consensus, but when I survey the American economy and I see our mass consumption of mostly useless imports on the one hand and our hollowed out industrial base on the other hand, I wonder if the reserve currency status also has some downsides and not just some upsides as well. And let me just put a final point on this, and I'd love to get your thoughts on that, Chairman Powell. We're, of course, now the main supporter of a massive land war in Europe between the Russians and the Ukrainians. I read recently, and I'm not going to,
Main supporter, proxy war, potato.
comment on how perfect or precise these estimates are, but I read recently that the United States is trying to ramp up production from 14,000 artillery shells to 20,000 artillery shells. That's per month, while the Russians are firing 20,000 artillery shells in Ukraine per day. And when I look at the American economy, we have a lot of financial engineers and a lot of diversity consultants. We don't have a lot of people making things. And I worry that the reserve currency status and the lack of control we have over our currency is perhaps driving that.
This person is still smiling. This person still has a very awkward smile during this very serious conversation.
I'd love to get your feedback on that. What are the upsides and downsides of the reserve currency?
That's a big question to try to answer.
You have 2 minutes, Chairman Powell, so plenty of time.
I can't even get started on that. So we are the world's reserve currency, of course, and that's because of our democratic institutions. It's because of our
military force, and the petrodollar.
Our control over inflation over many, many, many years. The world trusts the rule of law in the United States, and those are the things. So once you're the world's reserve currency, it's used in all over the world in transactions, and it's the place where people want to be in times of stress, is in dollar-denominated assets. Now, so of course we benefit by being able to pay for our goods all over the world, pay for everything anywhere in the world, mostly with dollars. That's an advantage. There's some economic theory around it that it also has burdens of various kind, but I can't call it all back to mind. But the other thing is, it's a very stable equilibrium, but it's not a perfect one. It's not a permanent one, rather. So there isn't any obvious candidate to replace the United States right now where you can have free flow of capital in and out of the country, where you can really trust the rule of law and democratic institutions, and keeping price stability, which you can here.
Do you think it gives us less control over our own currency, the fact that it's become the world's reserve currency?
Control over our currency.
That's a stupid way. That was a good question followed by a stupid question. That was a good question followed by a stupid question. Yeah, our democratic institutions. Yeah, I mean, it's just ridiculous. Just so close to understanding, so close to a good soundbite, and then you failed. And then you failed miserably. 131. 131. I think this is maybe the... Alright. Whoa. Paragraphs.
Will exceed $20 trillion, the cumulative deficit, not talking the debt, because it's going to grow the total federal debt to more than $51 trillion by 2033. Now, 2033 used to sound like a long ways away. We're 10 years away.
Choices. You have a really big job.
I had a misread of my own penmanship, which will happen.
And you have a single, in my mind, one and a half, maybe two missions. I think the first one handles the second one okay, but it's got to be tough when the White House is working against you and you don't have to comment. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Tester of Montana is recognized.
Chair Powell, thank you for being here today, and thank you for serving in this critical role at this critical time. I have talked many times in this committee, and I, especially right now, cannot overstate the importance of the Fed's independence. I said it in the previous administration. I say it now. We cannot be playing politics with our economy, and that is a fact. From a climate standpoint, I would just tell you it's entirely artificial right now anyway, because if you look at the hundreds of billions of dollars this country puts out every year in disasters due to climate instability, we ought to be asking our question, is that sustainable? Because quite frankly, it has to be done, and I don't think it's sustainable. So we've got to start looking for some solutions on the climate side sooner rather than later.
Okay, but you think that was such a word jumble. You're glad that the Fed is independent because you can't have the federal. That was such a word jumble.
The Reserve has a tough job, and I really appreciate how you've done it. Reasonable, working together, making hard decisions for the good of the economy. We have to get this right. So the question is, how much has inflation decreased since its peak?
Oh, I'm sorry. I had to show you that word jumble. It was just all over the place. We got that. All right, just one more segment, guys. We're there. That makes one person. Good call.
Overspent, and that the
creepy,
national debt
creepy smile lady
is at now at least 97% of GDP, and that we're going to face challenges of our own making. This is not about what the Fed has done. This is what about the Congress has done that you have to factor in to your decisions. Do you think about the costs of borrowing for the United States itself?
No, we do not, and we're not going to. In other words, that would be fiscal dominance. If we were, constrained in our monetary policy by the budgetary situation of the United States, and we're not. We're clearly not.
We are clearly not constrained by the fiscal responsibilities of the United. That is so big. All right, this was such a big moment. It's only a minute. Oh, it's only a minute too. All right, let me play it, and I'll play it a second time.
The path we're on is not sustainable, but the level of debt that we have is not unsustainable. Is sustainable. Put it that way. So we don't think about interest costs when we make monetary policy. We think about maximum employment and price stability.
It's your opinion that the level of debt we have is sustainable?
Yes, I mean we could clearly we have the the largest economy in the world. We can service this debt. That's not the problem. The problem is that we're on a path where the debt is growing substantially faster than the economy, and that's kind of by definition in the long run unsustainable. And the way countries have gotten fixed that is with longer term programs that have bipartisan support and that address the actual problem in the budget. That's really the formula.
Thank you. Is done that you have to factor in to your decisions. Do you think about the costs of borrowing for the United States itself?
No, we do not, and we're not going to. In other words, that would be fiscal dominance. If we were, constrained in our monetary policy by the budgetary situation of the United States, and we're not. We're clearly not.
We're not.
The path we're on
Clearly not.
is not sustainable, but the level of debt that we have is not unsustainable.
The level we have of debt is not unsustainable. Simple.
Is sustainable. Put it that way. So we don't think about interest costs when we make monetary policy. We think about maximum employment and price stability.
We don't think about monetary policies, guys.
It's your opinion that the level of debt we have is sustainable?
Yes, I mean we could clearly we have the the largest economy in the world. We can service this debt. That's not.
This is the head of the Fed Reserve saying that our debt is not even a question. Like, we have the largest economy in the world. We can handle this debt, no problem.
That's not the problem. The problem is that we're on a path where the debt is growing substantially faster than the economy, and that's kind of by definition in the long run unsustainable. And the way countries have gotten fixed that is with longer term programs that have bipartisan support and that address the actual problem in the budget. That's really the formula.
Thank you.
That's that. That's how we're leaving that day, right there. I don't think we need to do an MMT. You guys have anybody that's on here right now seems to be regulars or whatnot, so you guys don't need a MMT or a Federal Reserve documentary at the moment. I think everybody on, at least everybody on the Twitch side of things is a regular, so those of you on the YouTube side of things, we'll keep going, but you guys are going to get cut off soon. Dun dun dun. Alright. March 7th, DOS. Ned Price, how dare you leave us? How dare you go away?
And deserve in terms of their universal rights.
If you don't mind.
Okay, one question.
Yeah, Russia is slated to lead the UN Security Council next month. Is this something that the United States government is worried about, the world should be worried about?
Well, Alex, this is part of a rotation of the members of the UN Security Council. If I recall, Russia was president of the Security Council in February of 2022. And it was during a pretty notable session of the Security Council that Russia tried to bring together to issue its own propaganda to talk about what it terms speciously the violations of human rights in the Donbass region. But despite Russia's best efforts, the international community came together and exposed what Russia was planning to do to its neighbor on an unjust, illegal basis in the coming days. Secretary Blinken laid that out in that session in pretty exacting detail. Other countries who were represented at that roundtable in the UN Security Council chamber voiced similar concerns, grave concerns, about what we highly suspected Russia would be doing in the coming days. So even if Russia, and when Russia again takes the helm of the Security Council, there will be no amount of propaganda, of disinformation, of misinformation that Russia can attempt to manufacture to drown out its lies and to hide the truth from those represented in this body and those around the world who are listening to it.
But how about our propaganda machine? Is that running smoothly yet, Ned? Is that why you're stepping aside? Because our propaganda machine is running so well. Is that why you're stepping aside? Stepping out?
Thank you. Moving to the Palestinian issue. Today, the Israeli army stormed the Jenin refugee camp again. Left at least 6 dead, 6 Palestinians dead, 26 wounded, wreckage of home destroyed, and so on. And I'm wondering whether, in the statement last night that was issued after meeting with Mr. Dermer and Mr. Hanigbi, the Secretary of State called on both sides for calm. Is that the kind of calm that you expect from the Israelis, your partners? Or is it, or are you reconciled to the fact that this government, this Netanyahu government, will take it out on the Palestinians to sort of export its crisis at home?
Said a couple things on this. First, we are aware of these reports. We understand the IDF, which they have said publicly was pursuing a terrorist who murdered 2 Israeli civilians in what can only be described as a horrific attack late last month on February 26th. Israel, as we have made the point before, has the legitimate right to defend its people and its territory against all forms of aggression, including, of course, those from terrorist groups. And we've...
Okay, this has been like the deadliest year ever since like the 50s, and you are talking still about terrorist groups in Palestine and how Israel have a right to defense. What about Palestinians' right to defense? What about the Palestinians who are getting murdered constantly? What about their rights?
As I just mentioned, have seen far too many vivid illustrations of the terrorist threat that Israel faces, including in recent days. We remain deeply concerned by the sharp rise in violence in the West Bank, and we continue to urge the parties to take immediate steps to prevent the further loss of life. As you saw in the readout from the Secretary's discussion yesterday with Mr. Dermer and the National Security Advisor, that was a message that the Secretary reiterated in that context as well. We've said this many times before, but we continue to believe that Israelis and Palestinians deserve equal measures of freedom, of security, of prosperity. That remains our goal. That remains our long-term goal to, in the first instance, keep alive the prospects of a negotiated 2-state solution on the path to realizing that. The nearer-term goal is the goal we keep stressing in public and in private, that Israelis and Palestinians must take steps on an urgent basis to de-escalate tensions, to restore calm, and to put an end to this cycle of violence that has taken the lives of far too many on both sides.
This is really like Groundhog Day. I mean, you keep saying Israel has a right to defend itself. Fine, Israel has.
You keep saying this over and over again, man. You keep saying how Israel has a right to defend itself, and then Palestinians get slaughtered. Like, come on.
The right to defend itself. Israel considers most Palestinians to be terrorists. Anyone that lifts a stone or protests in any way is considered, in the Israeli parlance, as a terrorist. you said day after day glorifying the Ukrainian people resistance to the Russian occupation, which is good. What about the Palestinians? Do they have a right to resist this military occupation that has gone on for almost 60 years?
Saeed, our goal, as I just said a moment ago, is to, in the first instance, keep alive the prospects of a negotiated two-state solution, and ultimately to help realize that negotiated two-state solution. The in-state that we seek, that successive American administrations have sought, that countries around the world seek, is an independent state for the Palestinian people, where they can live with equal measures of security, of prosperity, of stability, of freedom, democracy, and importantly, of dignity. Now, of course, that is not the reality we have today. And so much of our efforts,
Of course.
in addition to attempting to support a restoration of calm, which has been the focus of recent weeks, has been to preserve not only the viability of a negotiated two-state solution, but to preserve the horizon of hope, to preserve the horizon of opportunity for the Palestinian people. That was a task that was complicated by our inheritance, what we found when this administration came into office in January of 2021. But we made it an early priority to restore the relationship with the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian people, and as part of those efforts, to preserve and reinforce that horizon of opportunity and hope to provide the Palestinian people with the humanitarian support that they need. More than $900 million worth of humanitarian support to the Palestinian people.
That didn't make it to them. I don't think that made it to them.
To provide them
No.
in what we hope are real and tangible ways with an improvement, however incremental it might be, in their quality of life. Now, of course, no one is satisfied. We're not satisfied. We're going to continue with that task ahead of us. But ultimately, all of this is in service of a negotiated two-state solution.
And for sure, this administration position and restoration, and you standing there day after day fielding questions and so on, is all appreciated. We see that. We see that the Palestinian issue is being, at least addressed. But, for Hawar, for instance, we just see the settlers doing exactly the same thing. Not necessarily with the same bloody outcome, but today, they're there today. They're dancing with soldiers, blasting music, chasing Palestinians, as we speak here, celebrating Pura. What measures should the United States take to make sure that these settlers do not go, unpunished in their day-to-day deeds?
Well, first, Saeed, we've spoken out clearly on this. We have condemned all forms of violence.
Speaking out though, we have the biggest military on the planet. We give Israel so much aid. We sell them so many weapons. We co-train our police personnel and our military personnel. There's so many things that we do. We could do more than say, we don't agree with it. We stand against. We say we don't like this. We condemn it. We constantly condemn it. We could do more.
We were aware of reports yesterday. We're aware of reports of another attack on Hawara by settlers yesterday, as you referred to, and that comes just 1 week after the completely unacceptable attacks and torching of property in the same village. We're extremely concerned by these events and the continuing violence in Israel and the West Bank. We very much
condemning and being concerned when you have that close of ties with Israel. You can do more for Palestine.
Appreciate the statements by Prime Minister
Stop
Netanyahu,
condemning and being
President
concerned.
Herzog, and others in Israel calling for a cessation of this vigilante violence. Accountability and justice should be pursued with equal rigor in all cases of extremist violence, and equal resources dedicated to prevent such attacks and to bring those responsible for them to justice. The events of recent days only underscore for us the fragility of the situation in the West Bank and the urgent need to increase cooperation to prevent further violence. We have expressed our concern for the well-being of the civilian population in Hawara, and as we've said repeatedly, Israelis and Palestinians.
Oh, you've expressed your concern and for the well-being.
Palestinians equally deserve to live in safety.
And you think that they deserve equal respect and prosperity and safety and blah blah blah, but you won't do anything to persuade the Israelis except for sell them weapons to test out on the Palestinians, except for to train their police personnel to shoot protesters. Oh, the hypocrisy is deep with this one. He will do well with the dark side now that he has been trained by the CIA stooge. Ned, what are we going to do without you?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Ned! Alright. Another day of Ned. Let's get her started.
Fortunately, affected.
This one's from March 8th, 3/8/81. Wait, no. So March 8th, we have one more day I'm going to skip March 9th because he doesn't say anything. We're going to skip the White House all week because they don't say anything. And then we will do, so we're going to do March 8th from the Department of State, and then we'll do the White House from March 10th. And we'll do some Biden.
Vulnerable people worldwide. The Black Sea Grain Initiative has been successful in keeping the prices down, the grain flowing, and millions of food insecure people in the developing world have been saved from acute food insecurity. The bottom line is that the world needs Ukrainian grain, and we are all better off when Ukrainian grain gets to world markets. With that, happy to take your questions.
Right. Thanks, Ned. Sorry I missed the very top, so I don't know what you were talking about then. Was it your departure?
No, we were talking about the International Women of Courage Award, yes.
Okay, all right. Something far more important.
Far more important, yes.
Personnel matters. Well, anyway, on the subject of personnel matters, let me just say, and I'll let Sean speak for the association, but just on a personal note, I wanted to say thank you for your time up here. I'll have more to say. There'll be a proper, I'm sure, time for a proper send-off / roast with perhaps a couple of surprises on the occasion of your final briefing from the podium. But anyway.
You're making me nervous hearing about this, but I appreciate the sentiment. Thank you.
Anyway.
Oh, Ned's gonna leave us. We are sad. Guess everybody has to kiss his butt. That's what they do. Every single person mentions it. Every single person has their beginning of their statement say something to Ned, which is why it takes an hour and 11 minutes this day instead of their typical 55, 55, 45, 55. Nope, this day has to go for a whole hour 10 because everybody has to kiss Ned's bootum.
Let's start for right now with, I'm very curious about this flurry of reports, both here and in Germany, over the Nord Stream 2 sabotage.
Oh, he loves these questions. He loves the Nord Stream 2. Let him just clarify things for you.
And what appear to be more than just suggestions and fanciful speculation that Ukraine or pro-Ukrainian groups, Ukrainian partisans were responsible. And I'm just wondering what you make of all this, particularly in light of a report, one specific report, that I think remains unmatched by anyone, that the U.S. was actually responsible for this.
So Matt, I'm glad
Oh boy.
you posed the question because I want to be very clear about this. First, importantly, we're not in a position to confirm the report you're alluding to. The anonymous claim.
Which
I'm referring to the report that came out yesterday.
the reports that came out, but it's more than one. I mean, there's like 4 in Germany and at least 2 in the U.S.
So
saying it was all signs lead to suggest that Ukraine or Ukrainian partisans would.
So as to all of those reports, I'm not in a position to confirm them. I want to be very clear about that. The anonymous claim in the first report, as I understand the chronology of this, to be clear, is not downgraded intelligence shared by the U.S. government, and the sources quoted in that piece were not authorized to speak on behalf of the U.S. government. Our point on this has been consistent.
Nobody cares if they're authorized to speak on behalf of the government. We only care if the information is factual. We don't care if they were authorized to leak it, like sometimes you guys do when you want information leaked. We only care if the information is factual, Ned. Is this why you quit? I have so many speculations about why he's quitting, guys. Oh, it's so great. It's so great.
Is an active, ongoing investigation on the part of 3 of our European partners, the Germans, the Swedes, the Danes, and that is ongoing. As we always do when there's a matter that's the subject of an ongoing investigation, we will let those investigations play out before we'll offer any comment.
On this point, but of course, first, I also want to give a shout out to you being there day after day, always being professional and courteous. So thank you and best of luck.
Thank you.
In your coming day.
Thank you for being courteous, lying to our faces, doing the deeds of the man, being the representation of the man.
On this point, but you certainly have suspects. I mean, you suspect someone is behind this sabotage, correct? I mean, do you suspect the Russians, for instance? Could the Russians have done something to their own pipeline or their own oil?
Saeed, it's not productive or constructive for me to engage in speculation, certainly not from the podium, and certainly not when there are ongoing investigations. And these are not just any investigations, these are ongoing investigations by competent, capable authorities in 3 of our close European partners, the Germans.
Oh, good. I'm glad that we have these independent, close partners doing these investigations. I'm sure they're going to come up. Our close partners are going to come up with some really good, neutral investigations. That's just exactly how the world works. People who are tied closely to the United States always find the United States guilty of things.
So we will defer to them, obviously, on the course of those investigations. They will be the one to report on the findings that they come up with in the course of these investigations, but we're just not going to get ahead of what they may uncover.
So you dismissed what was written in the New York Times on this group?
I'm not dismissing anything. I'm not ruling anything in. I'm not ruling anything out. I'm just saying we're not confirming, we're not commenting on the specifics in any of the reports that have emanated over recent days, and we're not doing that for a very simple reason. There are ongoing investigations, whether it's an investigation into an undersea blast like this, or an investigation into any other criminal or terrorist activity. Our typical posture is to let the investigation play out, and that's what we're doing here.
Our typical posture is to let the investigation play out before we say anything.
The problem with that is that you were very quick to say that the earlier report from last month, that said that President Biden had ordered this. You were very quick to say, no, absolutely not, that's preposterous, that's ridiculous, instead of saying, well, let's let the investigation play out.
Yeah.
So, what are we...
He's literally laughing like, yeah, I want to see his face. Oh, his face right now has got to be so good.
To think then,
You were to think that the reports that the United States government had anything to do with the undersea blast against the Nord Stream pipelines is ridiculous. We can
well,
discount
then
that
why
out of
can't...
hand.
Well, but you can't...
He's getting nervous. That's why he's quitting. I'm just speculating, of course, but that is where my speculations hold at the moment. He is getting nervous, so he is getting out of there.
Can't say the same about the reports that it was a Ukraine or Ukrainian partisans who...
Because Matt, we can speak to our actions when it comes
or
actions that we did not take in this case. Yes. When it comes to who may have been responsible for what did in fact happen to these undersea pipelines, we're going to have to defer to the investigations. Daphne, please.
The Americans that were kidnapped.
Can I come in here and change the conversation? Please. Look at this jackass. Oh no, look at his face. I'm gonna miss this, Ned. I'm gonna miss being mad at you. Oh, can I change the conversation to Mexico? Please. Let's please talk about the kidnappings of Americans in Mexico. Look how happy he is to talk about this. This is twisted. This is twisted.
By gunmen in Mexico. Have the
Look
bodies
how
of
happy.
who died been repatriated?
So Daphne, we're continuing to work very closely with our Mexican...
He was so happy to change the conversation. Way too happy. Entirely too happy to change this misleading, let's hate Mexico for this reason right now conversation. I'm skipping the
China
story.
militarily supplying Russia, that there's a hypocrisy issue that the U.S. is supplying weapons to Taiwan. Do you have any response to that?
All right, so again, let's go to the beginning of that question. I think I need to go back a little bit further. Let's start it out with
There are no plans, last one, there are no plans for any State Department officials to see her.
I'm not aware of any such plans.
The Chinese Foreign Minister, Qin Gang, he said recently that the U.S. Statements, I'm paraphrasing, but that the U.S. Warnings against against China militarily supplying Russia, that there's a hypocrisy issue that the U.S. is supplying weapons to Taiwan. Do you have any response to that?
Any response to the hypocrisy that the United States is supplying weapons to Taiwan and saying China supplying weapons to Russia is an act of like treason or war or whatever they're calling it nowadays? He could have cut this off by saying he wouldn't comment on the topic until after the investigation is concluded. He wanted his lies to go unchallenged.
Look, I'm not going to get into a tit for tat with the Chinese foreign minister, but what I will say is that comments like that seem to overlook precisely the state of play. What the United States is doing, along with dozens of countries around the world, is supporting the rules-based order, supporting the order that is enshrined in the UN Charter, in international law, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the principles at play that a big country can't bully a small country, a larger country can't attempt to redraw borders by force that might...
Big country can't bully a small country. We're one of the biggest. We're trying to bully so many people right now. Oh, the hypocrisy. The hypocrisy with this one is strong. He will do so good with the private sector or the CIA sector or the lobbyist sector or wherever he's going. Wherever Ned goes, I'm sure he will do great things to propagate the man.
doesn't make right. These are the same principles that, in this case, the PRC has signed on to as a member state of the UN, as a country that purports to believe in these very documents and principles, the UN Charter, the precepts of international law, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. What we are doing similarly in Taiwan, with Taiwan, is attempting to strengthen and to protect and preserve the status quo. This is all about the preservation of the status quo, because the status quo has, over the course of decades now, really been at the crux of peace and security across the Taiwan Strait and in the broader region. This is the same rule.
I mean, when exactly did American policy switch from Taiwan was part of, was fine to be okay with China, and now Taiwan is part of us? When did when did Taiwan exactly switch to a U.S. Dominated island instead of a China dominated island? When did that exactly happen? I don't remember that one.
Rules-based order that has been at the core of peace and security, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in the Indo-Pacific.
We want Taiwan to be a military base / U.S. corporate, like, mining extract. That's what we want Taiwan for. Absolutely.
For anyone to suggest that what we are doing is inconsistent is overlooking, I think, the core concepts that are at play. Everything that we're doing in the course of Ukraine, everything that we're doing in support of Taiwan is consistent with the rules-based order. It is an effort to undermine the status quo, which in Europe and Indo-Pacific has been responsible for the peace and security that has prevailed for much of the past 7 decades. Alex.
The last 7 decades has been under China control. Taiwan is not a country. Taiwan is not a country.
So let me echo the sentiment. Everything that could be said has already been said. I just can only add that our loss in this briefing room will be a great gain of those on the 8th or 7th floor. If you want a preview on how you can advise the Secretary on South Caucasus and Russia, Ukraine, you're welcome to talk about that as well. Moving to Georgia, if you don't mind. I was wondering if the events of past 24 hours have changed your view on how to respond to the events.
Well, Alex, just as we were yesterday, we're continuing to closely monitor the ongoing protests and the developments on the ground. We urge the government of Georgia to respect the freedom of peaceful assembly and peaceful protest. We urge all parties to exercise restraint and to avoid any escalatory or violent actions while respecting the rule of law and Georgia's democratic values. We are, as we've said consistently in recent days, deeply troubled by the recently introduced draft foreign agent laws, which, if actually made law, would stigmatize and silence independent voices and citizens of Georgia who are dedicated to building a better future within their own communities. Parliament's advancing of these Kremlin-inspired draft laws is incompatible with the people of Georgia's clear desire for European integration and its democratic development. Pursuing these laws,
Georgia's clear desire to be part of the UN, to be part of NATO, to let U.S. put weapons on their border so we could aim them at Moscow. This is insane.
We believe will damage Georgia's relations with its strategic partners and jeopardizes Georgia's Euro-Atlantic future. These are at the heart of the aspirations of the Georgian people, the project that the Georgian people have pursued over the course of decades now, since Georgia's independence. The United States has been a strategic partner to Georgia. Georgia has aspirations for fuller integration with Europe and the EU. All of those.
Georgia has aspirations, or America has aspirations for Georgia, and they're kind of like, I guess.
Things are in play in the context of the debate that we see raging now in Tbilisi.
Thank you for that. Let me unpack that a little bit. What we see is the Georgian Dream government, on one hand, has already made its choice. It's beating the Russian beating. And there's Georgian people out there. They are standing strong, as you articulated yesterday as well, that they are expressing their desire to stick with European pathway. Who are you standing with at this point?
Again, we are standing with the people of Georgia and the aspirations that they have. It would be our hope that the government of Georgia, as is our...
They're not going to say anything new, but yes, they want to push Georgia into NATO. They want to get Georgia to have U.S. weapons on their ground. That would just be great if we could encircle Russia and China completely in military bases. Good job, Ned. Way to really bring it home. And there's nothing from this day that I cared about at all. I put it in here just because, except for Ned looking over at his boy with awe, and he's just aw, Ned, aw. Yeah, we have a few guest speakers. This guy, he's a guest speaker. Another guest speaker. Both of them together. Oh, that's great. It's so entertaining. We got two people talking. We got guys questioning. We got Ned that comes back with the stupid face, because Ned makes stupid faces, and that's what he does. But as far as my opinion, March 9th was a uninteresting press briefing.
President Trump, when he was
Oh, this guy. But this guy did a thing. Remember this week? Biden released his 2024 budget in front of a random group of people. That happened. And I think it's worth maybe bringing up a couple seconds worth of information. A couple seconds. Seriously, I'm not kidding. A couple seconds worth. This is pretty funny.
budget, that would take the rest of the day. But it's not a detailed budget. But I want to give you the contours of what we're for and how it's in stark contrast to what appears to be what the other teams.
He calls it a team. I thought that was pretty interesting. These are politics. This is policy. He calls the Republicans the other team. Just so you know how they feel about politics, guys. That's really us against them. That's all they care about. They're not cared about actually doing anything for the American people. It's all about us against
But I
them.
just signed last year. We took Big Pharma on, and we won.
Oh yeah.
The first time. We won. The other team didn't think that's a good idea.
The other team doesn't think that's a good idea. The other team, because you guys are so different, such stark, complex differences between the Republicans and Democrats that we got to root for the other team. You know, it's kind of like the difference between the Giants and the Eagles. Like, please.
Every lead pipe in the United States of America so children can drink water, 400,000 schools, 6 million. We're going to make sure that they're not drinking poison.
I'm sure he had a very interesting stat to say right there, but he lost his mind many years ago.
For real. Every American. It's going to create thousands and thousands of jobs.
Like he's surprised. He is surprised that he lost his stats and now he's just got to ramble on. And let's move on to the end.
Well, like I said, we said through 2% of our gross domestic product. We're doing research today. It's now less than, we're getting closer to 1%, but it's less than 1%. We used to rank number 1 in the world in research and development. You know what we're ranked now? Number 9. China was number 8 a decade ago. Guess what? They're now number 2. Number 2. This new law in my budget will deliver.
That's pretty bad.
We used to rank number 1 in the world in research and development. You know what we're ranked now? Number 9. China was number 8 a decade ago. Guess what? They're now number 2. Number 2. This new law in my
Is this the one where he walks out without answering anything? I think that's, I mean, yeah, he didn't say anything at the end.
I mean it. Nothing beyond the correct if we do it together. So God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
It's a show. I'm glad they had the little, I mean, I wish there was like fireworks or something because it's all a show, right? It's very much just a show. All just a show, dance, show, dance. All right, last press briefing of the week. We made it. We get one day to look at Kareem. Fresh water isn't so fresh, and we're drinking plastic. Isn't that fun? All right, White House press briefing 3:10. I got a whole 2 minutes in the beginning and 1.5 minutes in the end, middle-ish, that I want to watch with y'all. All right.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Happy Friday. We made it. Okay, so joining us.
We made it. They had 3 really stupid, boring press briefings, none of which we're watching even worth a minute of. And today we're going to watch all of 3.5 minutes. That's how important the White House press briefings are, guys. It's insane. It's insane.
Today are 2 critical members of the President's economic team and cabinet, CEA Chair Cecilia Rouse and OMB Director Shalonda Young. They need no introduction and have joined us in the briefing room before. And so I'm going to keep it short, but a couple things I do want to say at the top about the 2 of them. Chair Rouse has led.
They need no introduction, but I'm going to go ahead and introduce them anyway.
The Council of Advisor for 2 years as of Sunday. This is her 3rd tour of duty at the White House, and she previously served as Dean of the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. She is also the first Black woman to be CEA Chair. Director Young has similarly led the Office of Management and Budget for almost 2 years. She previously served as the clerk and staff director for the House Appropriations Committee and knows the Hill and appropriations as well as anyone, maybe better than most. Shalonda is the first Black woman to be OMB director. You may be sensing a theme here. Stick with me for a second. But I do want to take a moment to note the historic nature of the moment that you see in front of you right now. All 3 of us are historic first in our roles. The first Black woman to serve as CEA Chair, OMB Director, White House Press Secretary, the first Black women right in front of you for all of those 3 important key roles in the administration.
Oh, you actually think you're an important key role? That's the funniest thing. That's the whole reason I brought this up. You actually think that you're an important key role? Oh, all you do is lie to the American public. That's all you do.
Now, that did not happen by accident.
No, it didn't happen by accident. It was very carefully thought out and planned.
It takes
tons of manufacturing consent. It takes tons of propaganda and leaning on people.
To this president, President Biden's leadership and commitment to building an administration full of the best and the brightest. And I am so proud to be standing with 2 of the best and the brightest in this administration. So with that, I will turn it over to Director Young and also Chair Rouse. But
no, you won't. I mean, you will, but we're not going to listen to it. We're going to jump ahead to something interesting because we're not going to listen to you all day.
Much agree. Go ahead, Phil.
Thank you. I have 2 questions for Director Young. The first is, for the Pentagon, the President is requesting $842 billion. That's a 3.2% increase from last year, but inflation is at 6% currently. So how is that not a cut in real terms?
So remember, it matters what we spend the resources on. This defense budget was built on the National Defense Strategy. As you can imagine, we tend to get from Congress a lot of things that this administration did not prioritize. So frankly, we had room in the base in which to prioritize to make sure we were taking care of the highest priority items.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that diversity is bad. I'm saying these people here are not diverse of thought by any means. They are not representing communities that they appear to represent. These are Harvard, Yale elites with families that show incomes very,
Our national defense. So that is the basic answer. It is about look under the hood. We believe we have the resources, as I mentioned, to counter China in defense and State Department and USAID. And it's the right level for doing the right thing. We don't say, I know people like to compare percentages from non-defense and defense. It's about what the right level is to achieve what we're trying to achieve. So we worked in lockstep with the Department of Defense to make sure we were funding the top priorities around the globe.
Okay, so just to make sure, she says that we are trying to fund the right amount for what we are trying to do. It's not about defense. It's about trying to get it with what we're trying to do. Like, oh, it's so bad. That was so bad. And that's all I have. That's all for the DC takedown. That's all we got for YouTube. So goodbye, YouTube. I'm cutting you out. And if you want to join the conversation, come on over to Twitch. Stony Marxist on Twitch. YouTube doesn't let me smoke. YouTube doesn't let me swear. So we are switching over there for the rest of the stream. Come on over and check us out. Join the conversation. Join the chat.